This is just very exciting. We're happy that there are so many hardy souls able to come out in this 0-degree weather or worse, whatever we have. On behalf of the Alison Tobey Smart Memorial Fund, we welcome you to this beautiful church and tonight's program that we're so excited about. The Alison Tobey Smart Fund was created by her parents, one of whom is here with us today, Sue Smart, sitting in the second row here, and we're very honored and pleased to have her joining us. But after Alison took her life about 40 years ago, and our goal with this memorial fund is to support the healthy emotional, educational, social, and spiritual life of our community's youth. And we do things that are just in the Kenilworth Union Church area and the New Church geography and beyond. But educational events like this is an important part of what we're doing. And we're fortunate tonight to have three fabulous guests who have a deep understanding of the challenges of supporting loved ones as they're struggling with mental health issues. And collectively, they bring a really unique, comprehensive perspective. It kind of blows me away. We've got, the mental health professional and the journalist and the family member. We've got the male and the female perspectives. We've got the child and the parent and the sibling perspectives. We've got the cultures of yesteryear and today represented, and a variety of diagnoses. So there's a lot of things that can make it relevant for almost everybody. So we're very excited. We've got the bases covered, and these guys all have a lot of great things to say. I think we've got 4 hours for this. Is that right? That would not be enough, but it. But so it's going to be about an hour that we'll spend kind of in the presentation mode, and then we'll go on from there. First, we have Meg Kissinger, who is the author of While You Were Out, a critically acclaimed memoir detailing not only her experiences growing up in Wilmette in a family that was beset with mental health challenges, both with her parents and her two siblings who ultimately, more siblings, but two who ended up taking their own lives, but also her experiences as a journalist covering these issues and the navigation of mental health challenges across the country. So she's got it's a fabulous book, and we encourage you to read both of these books. They are not scary, boring, depressing stories. They're powerful, uplifting stories, and Meg's is one of them. Trip Friedler at the other end recently released his riveting memoir, The Tunnel. I think of it as a very brave, intimate account of the struggles that he and his wife Heidi faced in dealing with the mental health challenges of their son Henry, and the ultimate loss of Henry, and how they kind of moved on and helped him through and helped themselves and helped each other through the process. So again, it's a very powerful story that is shared, and we're very lucky to have them here. I think both authors address these tragic situations with candor, compassion, humor, love, caring, and they leave us, each of the books, it's amazing how much overlap there is in the sense of we're not alone. Other people are facing these kinds of challenges, and we can make it through, which are two really, really valuable things to think about and remember in this situation. And moderating, we have our friend Renee Dominguez, who's the co-executive director of the Family Service Center in Northfield. She will bring not only her professional perspective, but a local voice and thoughts, and answer questions about resources locally here that may be useful. Renee is going to lead a 45-minute discussion, after which we will take questions So hopefully everybody got a note card. If you didn't, we can get more circulating, and there should be pencils on the back of the pews if you want to write a question down and pass them to the center so you don't have to stand up and ask a difficult question in front of the crowd. But we'll collect those questions when it's time for the Q&A. And so that'll be probably 15 minutes or so of Q&A. After the Q&A, we would love it if you would fill out a brief questionnaire that we handed out so that we can keep refining what we do as the Alison Tobey Smart Memorial Fund and the programming that we do. And we invite you to join us in the Culbertson Room, which is right through here, and a big room where the book stall is present if you want to buy one of their books or have it inscribed by the authors. And there will also be refreshments. I think there's ice cream and there's cookies and coffee and some things that will hopefully be more appropriate. And there's also a number of mental health agencies represented back there. So if you want to dig in a little bit deeper and talk to somebody local in the community, you can do that. So thank you again for coming. Renee, take it away.
Can you guys hear me okay? All right, great. I think I want to just open up by thanking both of you for being here and for sharing your stories. I think mental health has come a long way, and the world has come a long way in being open to learning and hearing more about these challenges and your journeys. And it takes a lot of courage to be able to come here and talk about this. So I want to thank you both. I also want to acknowledge how awesome that everyone is here tonight on a really, really cold day to talk about this really difficult, be part of this really difficult important conversation, and for the Alison Tobey Smart Memorial Fund for hosting this and making mental health a priority. I think it's really significant, and I just appreciate it a great deal. And personally, I'm honored to be here tonight. Having said that, I think I'm suspecting that there are some folks here who have read your books and maybe some who have not. And I'm wondering if you guys can each take a few minutes to provide a general backdrop, sort of nutshell. Each of your scenarios, they're linked, as Spider said, they're linked and they're different. And so to be able to sort of lay the foundation, I think that would be a great place to start. Do you want to start, Meg?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I also want to start out by thanking this beautiful congregation for this invitation. It's just like I just am pinching myself that on a very bitterly cold night, you're coming out to share wisdom and to have conversations about what we didn't used to be able to talk about. So my book came out in September of last year, and the subtitle, so it's called While You Were Out, but the subtitle is An Intimate Family Portrait of Mental Illness in an Era of Silence. So as Spider referenced, I grew up just down the road a piece at the 1200 block of Greenwood Avenue in Wilmette, to be specific. And I'm the fourth of 8 kids. We went to St. Francis Xavier in Wilmette, and if you might not pick up on that, we were Catholic. But anyway, and had a lot of fun. It was a loving, warm house, but we also had a lot of mental illness, and that was in an era when we didn't know how to talk about it. So when my sister started showing great signs of her illness, and then ultimately took her own life, our family's inability to really process that and talk about that in ways that we needed to, I'm pretty sure laid the ground for the tragedies that would follow. So that's why it's just so profound for me, and I'm so grateful that we are at a place now where we're having these conversations. I'm going to turn it over to Tripp right now, because when I read his book, it knocked my socks off, and I can't recommend it highly enough, because I'll let him tell about his book.
Well, thank you, and I just want to say that I read Meg's book about a year ago now, and it's a great book. So my story is a little different. I am not a writer per se, though I did write a book, so I guess I am a writer. I had a son who was severely mentally ill, bipolar disorder, and presented itself relatively early through depression. If you read the book, you'll know that in the book I deal with the fact that since I knew everything, he couldn't possibly have depression because my son wouldn't have depression. So it took me a little while to get my head around that one. And then the mania hit, and that one was pretty obvious. And so, about 5 or 6 hospitalizations. It's just it's a pretty crazy story. And I started writing my book, as Meg said, it's sort of interesting. We have the Jewish perspective here too. So not only do we have a sibling, but we have a parent. I started writing my book really to work out my issues and to try to make sense of something that really didn't make a lot of sense. And so my book's a very personal book. It's personal to me, and it tells a story. It's got some crazy stories in it, and it was incredibly cathartic to write. I'm happy that it's going to help other people. It first and foremost helped me, and so that's sort of the reason I wrote the book. And anytime I can talk about mental health, because no one was talking about it around us, and we felt very alone. We felt we were on an island. We felt left behind. So, and that's a horrible feeling that I hope no one else has to experience. It's a crazy disease. Because, as I like to say, when someone says you're got bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or severe depression, they're not bringing casseroles. And so, cancer, you get a casserole. Schizophrenia, not so much. And it's a shame, really, because they're all illnesses, and they're all bad illnesses. So that's sort of why I wanted to write this book and try to normalize something that's far from normal. So anyway.
Appreciate that. So some of the things that I'm thinking a little bit about, so I'm thinking about we have the sister perspective, we have the parent perspective, but we also have, highlight that you were also a daughter of parents who had some mental illness as well and some substance issues. And so there's a way that gets played out, in generations. And part of what you're doing in telling these stories is trying to prevent additional tragedy from happening. As I sit here and I think about what you wrote and sort of where you both came from, part of what I'm thinking about is how relevant it is likely to this community that we're sitting in, right? So you were here in Wilmette, and you in your book talk pretty openly about being a resourced family, having the ability to be able to get services if they were out there and pay for services that many people might not be able to pay for. And that, you were here in Wilmette in this community, larger community, where things look really good on the outside, right? And so I'm thinking a little bit about that and what might be helpful for us to think about here in this community, in this evening now, as you sat in your nice big home in Wilmette and you sat in your home that was, I'm sure, looked great on the outside in New Orleans. And so just thinking a little bit about that, what you might share in terms of your experiences of what was on the outside versus what was going on the inside, and what did you learn and what might you share with this group here about that?
Yeah, well, I remember so many, cocktail parties or family get-togethers where the conversations were always around, especially when you got to be in high school, where are you going to go to college? And the intense pressure. The North Shore of Chicago is a beautiful place to grow up, but it's also a very difficult place to grow up, and the competition is quite fierce, and the bar is very, very high. So when anybody falls short of that, it's a struggle. And so, yes, in so many ways, we had so much privilege. And I, now as a full-on, somebody who covered the travails of the god-awful mental health system in America, I especially realize, how very privileged we were. That said, there's also that pressure, I think, intensifies. It's kind of, so I don't mean to suggest that it's tougher when you have the resources, but you know what I'm getting at, the expectations and the, we talk so much about stigma, but I really like to reframe that to be more about discrimination. Because yes, there is stigma, there is a shame around mental illness, maybe less so than it was back when I was growing up, but the North Shore of Chicago and all, I think all privileged communities, it's a shorthand, we have shorthand conversations about how we're doing. And when you go to a cocktail party, they don't really want to know how you're doing. Mostly, they want to just know, where you're going to school and what your latest accomplishment is.
We have a saying in the Friedler family that if you have the money for the solution, you don't have a problem. Mental health is not that way, right? We had plenty of money. We spent a lot of it trying to get help. At the end of the day, money won't solve this problem at all. And so we did have privilege. It breaks my heart, quite honestly, to think about those who don't. Every time I pass anyone on the street who's in distress, my heart bleeds because, but for the grace of God, there goes my son. We did, I agree with Meg that in our community as well, it was a community of success, and so once you get off that track, it's hard to get back on it, and I think as a parent, and I can only speak as a parent, it's hard. I have a friend who has a great line. She her son had bipolar disorder, and it didn't end well for her either, and she goes, I'm just so tired of hearing all my friends and their little perfect pieces of art, because we didn't have a perfect piece of art, right? And so, so you feel a little bit like that. But on the other hand, it's not anyone else's fault. I mean, you got to have some compassion for others, and everyone wants to brag about their kids. I mean, I brag about the two I have all the time. It's just, it's difficult as a parent watching kids struggle, right? The line is you're only as happy as your least happy child, and the more kids you have, the less probability you'll have a happy moment, because it's tough to have them all be happy at the same time. But, when you have one struggling, and Meg can probably speak better to this, it's as a sibling, watching your parents, I mean, I can't imagine because I'm the parent. I can only imagine what my daughters were thinking when we were spending a lot of time, energy, and resources on their brother. It's tough. It's just, this is not a fun disease by any stretch. But Meg Meg being a sibling would probably have a better perspective.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't help but resent. And I look back, especially as I was putting this book together, at my old teenage self so many years ago, and the resentment, that I had about how my sister made my dad cry and my mother stay up at night worrying, and and then later my brother as well. And you can't help but be resentful. I now know that, of course, it wasn't intentional. Nobody wants to have depression, and nobody wants to be anxious or to feel ugly or isolated, but those are all conditions. That's all how people with serious mental illness feel. And I've forgiven myself, thank you, therapy, for, the bratty little sister that I was, or the resentful little sister. But yeah, it takes a toll. And it's a huge stress on the whole family when somebody is not well.
I think I want to acknowledge a couple of things in that context, that both of your stories and both of your narratives, I thought you guys did a fantastic job of being honest and real about some of the negative feelings you had towards the situation and towards your loved ones. I think as a psychologist, I'd just like to acknowledge we've got mixed feelings about, more than one feeling at once. And, you can love your sister and also be really ticked off that she was, sucking up all the energy in the room. And similarly, you can have that same experience. And I think that there's a lot of shame that can go along with those natural reactions that we have to our loved ones who create this distress for us. So I just want to acknowledge that and normalize that and appreciate that you guys talked about that.
One of the things that I've come to grips with is the fact, what you just said, is that two things can be true, right? And in my case, the two things that can be true, and I think many out here maybe feel this way if you're experiencing any of this, is you can do the best you can, and it cannot be enough, right? Both things can be true. So you can do the best you can with the resources that you got, and then it just cannot be enough, right? And you got to wrap your head around that. Mm-hmm. And two things that are polar opposite, both being true, is a hard thing to wrap your head around.
I think, especially when it comes to suicide, when you lose somebody to suicide, it's a human reaction to think, what could I have done to interfere so that we wouldn't have this outcome? If only I had been nice to my sister that day when she called, and I was such a little, can I say shit in church? Anyway, I was such a little imp to her. And so you go back and you play those things over in your head time and again. But the fact of the matter is, and this is really hard to acknowledge, but we don't have control over that. There's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that we can learn about how to have conversations with people that we love who are suffering, and we can do a lot better. But at the end of the day, we don't affect the outcome. We can't put that on ourselves.
We can't be responsible for that.
Right. It's and for someone who's a control freak like myself, that was a difficult lesson to learn. Because I was Superman and I could fix everything. So turns out not so much. That's a hard lesson to learn, and letting go of control is it's way easier said than done. But it's just a tough road to go down. Period.
I appreciate those thoughts. I'm thinking a little bit about the experience of mental illness in your family and the way in which it can be isolating. And wondering if either of you or both of you have thoughts about connection, support. I'm aware that you guys have different circumstances. A parent of a child who at the time was alive, whose information is that to share? There are boundaries around that. Your situation is coming sort of after your family members have already passed away. So just thinking a little bit, if you look at each of your individual circumstances and think about ways in which it impacted you, and I heard both of you name at some level isolating, how you navigated that and what advice you might have for folks about navigating that you've learned, sort of hindsight, what you may have learned about that.
Tripp, you talked about going to Al-Anon when Henry was in the thick of it. Mm-hmm. And I went to plenty of Al-Anon meetings. Both my parents struggled with alcoholism, and miraculously both found sobriety before they died. My dad was sober for like the last 45 years of his life or something like that, which was a huge gift. But, one of the things that they teach you is that you're powerless, over drugs and alcohol. And just the humility that is required, to be, to learn from what you're in. I mean, easier said than done, and I can say that in hindsight, but so I think it's kind of extending what we were just talking about, is coming to grips with the fact that we can't control the narrative. We can only control our reaction to what is going on. And you know, I talk about how in the book about the week before my brother Danny died, he wrote me a letter, and Danny had never acknowledged his illness. We all saw it a million miles away, and he'd been very ill for very many years. But kind of at the end of his life, he got on some new medication that gave him some clarity, and he looked around and thought, like, holy cow, I have made a mess of my life. And he wrote me this letter, and he was like basically confessing to having mental illness. I'm using that in quotes because confessing is a loaded word. It's, again, nothing he wanted to have, but he talked about what it was like to have bipolar and what an awful disease it was and how awkward it caused him to do awkward things. And then he said, you know, what we need is love and understanding. And that, to me, at the time sounded so woo-woo, but then after he died, you know, I thought, he's exactly right. You know, it's the perfect algorithm. What we need is love and understanding.
And you know, it's interesting being here in this community and talking about this because I come from uptown New Orleans, where, by the way, we got 8 inches of snow today. So I'm really, really jealous that I'm not home because we never get to see 8. I saw 8 inches up here in Chicago, but never in New Orleans. But we come from a very affluent community, uptown New Orleans, and so having a son whose society considers less than is isolating, and you don't want to. You feel like the whole world's talking about you. They probably aren't, but you feel like they are. You feel like you're the only one who's going through something like this, which I now know is not true. It's extremely isolating, and I think the more affluent the community you come from, ironically, where you have all these resources, the more isolated you feel. Because you look around and everyone's leading this picture-perfect life, or at least it appears to be picture-perfect from the outside, and you know you're not. And so it's a very isolating experience. And then attached to that, a parent like myself who's extremely competitive and extremely worried about success, and it's just horrible. It does you no good. I can tell everyone in this room that you should try to leave that behind because it really does you no good. It took a horrible event for me to learn that lesson. It's tough, and the bigger and more affluent community you come from, in many ways, I think it makes it tougher.
So given that, where did you find support?
And poor Meg, I mean, mine was 2015 through 2025, where it's the modern age. You know, and it's interesting, I just want to digress for half a second, because I think back to friends of mine who now I know were bipolar, who took their own lives, you know, in the 70s. And, you know, I was totally unaware of anything like that. We just thought they were great kids, you know, who were a little on the wild side. But we struggled with that. You know, you struggle for 2 reasons, I think. The first reason you struggle is a legitimate reason. It's that it's sort of not, as a parent, it's sort of not your story to tell, right? Society is so stigmatizing on this disease, and so you really don't want to let the world know something that's going to impact your child in a negative way. And so that in and of itself creates a barrier for help, right, in and of itself. And then secondly, even if you can overcome that, it's not like there are ads on billboards saying, you know, call us. And so I think we've been very supportive. You know, all the proceeds from this book are going to mental health groups because, you know, I don't want to really make any money off of it. And so one of the groups in New Orleans is a group called CALM, which is Clear Answers to Mental Health, Louisiana Mental Health, and it's a group called EPIC, which is Early Psychosis Intervention Clinic, which is a lifesaver, and we lucked into it. But I'm starting to see those billboards pop up.
They're out there, yeah.
Yeah, and that's incredibly helpful, where you can see a billboard and you go, oh, wow, I could call that number. You don't have to ask anyone. You don't have to put yourself out there. But those are few and far between. And in the 70s, they were non-existent.
Yeah, now I'm so, you turn on, listen to the Bears game. My joke is that you do need mental health if you're a Bears fan. But
and a Saints fan.
Right. But I was fortunate in that I was a newspaper reporter, so I got to go out for years and write these stories, talking to total strangers, and ask them the questions that I was too scared to ask the people that I love the most. So I kind of did it like a do-it-yourself mental health crash course, on the job, which got me only so far. At the end of the day, it didn't do it all the way. I mean, I still had to stare down my demons. And it's also frightening to think about the intergenerational trauma, what my grandparents lived through, and then that was passed on to my parents, and then, and now here we are, there's the next generation that's coming along. So, we're very mindful of how they are all doing. But a lesson that our family learned from, these tragedies was we've got to talk about it. And we have to set our egos aside, and we have to find the humility and find the courage, and also find the time, the patience. I mean, these conversations take a long time, and you can't just, hit a button or snap your finger and have this done. This is sustained involvement and sustained compassion, and just taking time to learn how to be present to somebody.
I think that you guys are both speaking to some really important things here, and I want to acknowledge that I do believe that as we move forward, the stigma does get a little bit smaller, and that this is something that is talked about, and there are billboards that are going up because people like you are telling your stories. In our community, we have the high school that screens for depression and mental health challenges and suicidal ideation. And there are things in place for students that it's built into the systems to be able to support folks and try to catch them early on. And I think that's an important thing to remember. There's been some movement in a really positive direction to minimize the amount of stigma that goes around mental health challenges. And both things can be true. It's still really hard, right?
And I do think, again, I'm going to harp on the fact of a successful community. I think it's a little harder for kids in an environment where everyone's doing so well to be able to admit they're not, right? I mean, I think that's hard. And I think as parents, we get caught up in that sort of rat wheel of our own. And I think the more successful the community, probably the harder it is for someone to admit they're a little different. They're not on that path that all their friends appear to be on. And I think that's tough.
Well, that's why books like yours are so important, because you put the lie to that, or you shine a light on that, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I forgot my thought, but it'll come to me. I'll take a sip of water.
Right.
I think another question that I wanted to ask you guys, given that your families have been through so many challenges related to mental health, and because I'm a psychologist and I can't not ask this question, you do talk a little bit about it in each of your books, just sort of the role of therapy, the role of mental health supports, sort of what that has looked like for you and your families during this time.
So I'm a huge fan of therapy, and I'm going to tell you a very short story. So this is actually my second book. My first book is a business book called Freeing Gulliver, 6 Swift Lessons in Life Planning. A little play on that word. And in writing that book, I I had an agent, and Dearborn Press was interested, and we went to this meeting, and I had my agent there, and had a co-writer because I didn't think I could write real well, and we were all at this meeting, and we leave the meeting, and the agent goes, I go, well, I killed that meeting. And everyone goes, no, I don't think you really killed that meeting. And I'm like, well, I don't know what meeting you were at, but I killed that meeting. And so I get home, and 2 days later, I'm in my car. I'm actually taking coursework to get a master's in counseling. And I'm sitting in the car getting ready to go out to the class, and I get a call from the agent. The agent goes, I don't know how to tell you this. They loved everything about the book. They didn't like you. And so until you get feedback like that, you really don't know how to, that's the time you go see a therapist. So I was dealing with a dad who had Alzheimer's and not dealing with it well, and I'm getting this master's. So I was going to go see a therapist anyway about my dad. And I go into the office, and I said, I know we were going to talk about my dad, but we're going to talk about something else. And that was 24 years ago, and I've been in therapy ever since. The only thing I'll pay for my kids is a gym membership and therapy. And the gym membership because I want them to be physically fit, and therapy because probably I caused it. And so I'm a huge believer in therapy. It saved my life.
And
my marriage.
Well, and hooray for that.
Right.
Yay. All right, so the flip side of that is this. Okay, remember I told you I'm Catholic? Okay, so Catholic people don't need to go to therapy. Isn't that good? That's good news for us. We can just pray it away. After my mom died and my dad got remarried. Anyway, I'll spare you. That's a whole different book that I'll never write. But I did go to therapy. My friend said, you're really crabby. You need to go talk to somebody. I'm like, I'm Catholic. I don't need to go. Anyway, I went, and the lady said, well, tell me about your family. And I was like, uh-oh, how much time do you have? Well, anyway, as the story rolled along, and I could see her scribbling these notes, and then I thought, oh my God, she's gonna hit that little button under her desk, and people in white coats with a net are gonna come and take me away, and that's the last anybody's ever gonna see of me. And she said, I think you do really well to come back, and let's really go through this, several times. Well, we'll start you on this very rigorous program. This was 20-something years ago, and I said, you know what, let me go home and get with my calendar, and I'll call you right back. Well, guess what? I never called her back. I was too scared. I was petrified of going to therapy. But when I finally resolved to write this book, I thought, oh, whoa, I'm in way too deep, and I'm going to need some heavy-duty scaffolding here. So I did engage the services of a therapist, and it changed my life. So I am ever, ever, ever grateful. And I was like, where have you been all my life, therapy? But it was there for the plucking. I just couldn't see it.
Yeah, it's a luxury, and quite honestly, everyone benefits from it. And I'm a huge therapy fan, so it saved my life. It literally saved my life and my marriage. So, as a matter of fact, my wife stole my therapist. So I was going to my therapist, and she'd be saying, well, have you asked Andre about Henry? Have you asked Andre about this? I'm like, Heidi, why don't you just come and you can ask him yourself, which she did. And then she started calling the hour her happy hour. And she took over my therapist, and it sort of pissed me off a little bit. But now it's our therapist, which I have to say we don't go to as much as we used to. We only go if we really have a big issue we need to work out. But everyone should. It's the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
All right. I know, Spider, I think this might have been the time where you wanted me to remind people about the little cards. I don't know where Spider went. Yeah, is that good?
Yeah, so everybody got a card. If you have any questions, write them down, pass them to the center. We'll collect them in a couple minutes, and then bring them up and present them to Renee to share with the group.
Sounds good. So maybe while people are writing questions down,
Or not.
I'll ask sort of maybe a final closing question before we take questions. And I think what I would want to ask each of you that might be helpful for this group here is to reflect, what were the lessons learned, the most important lessons learned that you would want to share with folks who might be experiencing mental illness in their family or from a loved one. What have you learned that might be helpful for them to think about, that they might be able to take with them, actionable or not, but just a nugget of information or a few nuggets that might be helpful for people to think about and know and hear from you as someone who's gone through this and is living to share their story.
Well, it might be a little redundant, but just, again, that you're not alone, that's for sure. I'm just overwhelmed at the number of people who've reached out to me to say, wow, I thought you were writing a book about my family. There are so many people who are suffering and feel alone, and you are absolutely not alone. And to be kind to yourself, be gentle to yourself. You are a loving person. You are trying your best. The person in your family who was suffering so greatly with their mental health, as I said earlier, they don't want to be doing that. They would rather be happy. So if you can find ways to have these conversations and reach out for help. Don't try to do it alone. We just gave the big plug for therapy. But there are also so many amazing organizations out there now, and avail yourself of them. And it sounds contradictory, but again, if you've tried your hardest and you've done everything that you can possibly do, and the person that you love ends up dying because of their mental illness, just take comfort in knowing that you did do your best. I organized my book around a Mary Oliver poem, and it's in Blackwater Woods. And I'm not a big reader of poetry, and I'm embarrassed about that, but a friend pointed it out to me, the poem, and it just spoke to me. And the last stanza of that poem says, "To live in this world, we must do three things. Love what is mortal, hold it against your bones, knowing your whole life depends on it. And when the time comes to let it go, to let it go." And I thought, wow, that's my book right there. That's the story of my family. That's the story of my experience in loving and losing people in my family to mental illness. And so I hope that doesn't happen, but if it does, find ways to let it go.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. What I would tell people, what I have told people, is find a community. Find your community, because without it you're going to drown. You're just not going to make it. And so, and that community is out there. It really is out there. It's hard to find. Groups like this is great. I mean, I wish I would have come to something like this. I probably wouldn't have come because I would have thought I didn't need it. But you got to find a community. You have to find people you can talk to. Otherwise, it will eat you from the inside out. And then I want to echo what Meg said, is have some compassion for yourself, because it's tough, right? It's tough. I mean, I don't know what it's like to have a sibling, but I know what it's like to have a son. And it's hard, right? Every day is a struggle. Every day, you're worrying what's going to happen next. Bad things can happen. And so just have some compassion on yourself. Do the best you can, and find your resources. And I want to give, I know we're going to have a little resource meeting out there, but I'm going to give a shout out to Michael Pollack, who's here with the Depression and Bipolar Support Organization, because ironically there was one in New Orleans that I didn't even know about, right? And so he'll be out here, hopefully in the room over there. And
Can Michael raise your hand?
Raise your hand, Michael. I see him.
Okay.
There he is.
Thanks, Michael.
But it's if you can find people you can talk to, and even laugh about things, that not many other people are going to find funny, but you just need to find a community, and they are out there. They really are.
So if you're gonna highlight an organization, I want to highlight one. So I'm gonna call my buddy Joe Feldman to stand up. So Joe is a Wilmette guy, yay, who runs an organization called Cover My Mental Health. He helps families file insurance claims or be successful at getting insurance coverage for mental health claims, which is a huge barrier to mental health care. I for 6 years taught a course at Columbia University in New York City, investigating the failures of the mental health system and all the ways that we systemically in this country create barriers for better mental health care. And I would say very much towards the top of that list is the inability to afford mental health care. First of all, to find a provider, and then to be able to afford one. And Joe's organization does a beautiful job at helping navigate that. So, woot woot.
Joe got a better call out than Michael.
We both got that.
And you said you're competitive.
I'm not competitive.
And we'll have those two resources and other resources in the room right back here afterwards if anybody wants to just bat ideas around or get another perspective. That will be a welcome opportunity. Here's at least a few. We'll just bring some more.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Okay, this first one, I'm going to go ahead and read out loud. It says, what have you learned about balancing, first, showing love and support for someone with mental illness, and 2, setting boundaries and not feeling resentful?
I want to answer this
That
question.
is such a great question.
So this is a great
Such
question.
a great question.
And I had this thought earlier, and like Meg, it pure escaped me. I don't believe in tough love. I write about this in the book. I don't believe in tough love. What I believe is in exhaustion, right? It's tough to watch a kid drown, but you can be too tired to go out and swim and get them, right? So I don't believe you should ever give up until you're so exhausted that you just can't do anymore. And that happened to us. We, at one point, Henry was in a treatment in North Carolina and wanted to leave it, and we had nothing left, right? And so we said, you can leave. He took a Greyhound bus down to Florida to get his car, it's a whole nother crazy story that's in the book. And Heidi, God bless her, it was harder for her than it was for me. But you just get so exhausted that you have nothing left. So I don't think you could be tough love, but I do believe you can be so exhausted that there's just nothing left. I don't know your experience.
Yeah, boundaries are very important. I don't know that we had them. We actually did not have them, but we should have had them. But I now know, as a mother, so I have a son who struggles with depression and anxiety, and I worry constantly about him. And, given our family history, it's especially fraught. So I have learned over the years that he's not my brother, he's not my father, he's my son. So that's a different relationship. And I have to show him all the support and all the love and the warmth that I can. But again, I can't control what he's doing.
And so what I hear both of you guys saying is accessing whatever you can, and that you may be tapped out, but accessing whatever you can to be able to share and show support and love and kindness, while also knowing when enough is enough in terms of what you have in your tank, And then also, I'm thinking a little bit from like a therapist perspective, the idea of setting boundaries and resentment. So that was kind of put in that part of the question. When we set boundaries and then we don't hold them and people cross them, we get resentful. So it's talk about needing therapy. Everyone could benefit, in my opinion. I know I'm biased, but everyone could benefit from learning about setting those boundaries, holding those boundaries to minimize that amount of resentment. It's not easy to do. It's not something we're taught.
I think resentment a lot of times comes from an inability to understand. So it's like a little bit like, Tripp, maybe you had this experience when you're writing a book and you're like, ooh, I'm kind of blocked here. There's no such thing really as writer's block. I don't think it's reporter's block, like you don't have enough information. And I think the same thing is true in relationships. When we get to a point where we're resentful or frustrated, I believe it's we just don't know enough about what that person is going through. And if you work to understand it, that will help to minimize. Maybe that's too simplistic because I know it's relentless. I mean, that's the thing about mental illness is, it ebbs and flows, and you can go through these periods. Like even Henry, your last Thanksgiving with that guy, and it was magical. And, and same thing with my brother Danny, right before the end for him. He was so warm and reaching out. So we try to assign these logical, like cause and effect, and it's not always there. So
I can just say though, as a parent, it's hard, right? I mean, it's hard. You can set the boundary, but it's hard.
it's exhausting.
It's exhausting, and you just get so tired.
Oh, thank you.
Woo, a lot of questions.
So I'm having a hard time with the handwriting, you guys.
I can read bad handwriting because I have bad handwriting.
This is the one I'm trying to read.
Here, let me try.
I don't have glasses. Are you kidding?
Let me try. Okay, love and understanding. How do you get from understanding to love if you understand depends on our identification of the causes of the illness, I think, or whatever, of the causes of this. It's just tough.
Does the person who wrote that question want to just stand up and ask it? Yeah.
You're right.
Oh.
So if you start with the idea, well, I will master this problem by understanding it, you don't understand the cause, and so you don't understand why you have to deal with what you have to deal with. And my question really has to do with how do you explain that to yourself? Since not only yourself, you might say, well, maybe I passed the wrong genes here. Maybe I passed the wrong behavior on to this person. And maybe other people around you and your perfected environment, people who are able to lead uncomplicated lives, at least uncomplicated by mental illness, will not be able to understand your problem. So you can't reach out to them. The point here is, where do you get to that understanding that allows you to go love when you don't have a cause and effect sequence that you can put a logical narrative around? That's the question.
That's a really great question.
That is a great question.
I mean, I don't understand the mechanism of bipolar that has chewed up our family. I'm scared to death of it, and I worry so much about what, again, we pass along to the next generation. And, we're so far away from a real effective treatment and way, way, way far away from a cure. And the medical community, is not where it needs to be. We don't know yet the causes of it. So you're right, it's very hard to understand that. So I think we can not know what causes somebody to act erratically, somebody in a manic state who's going to think it's a good idea to drive across the country or do some cockamamie scheme. And how could you ever understand that? Doesn't make any sense. You can't understand something that doesn't make sense. You can understand that it's the illness that's causing that, and you can try and tease out the illness and what is that doing to the person deep down inside that you love very much. I don't know.
Yeah, my answer to that is I don't understand how TVs work, but I still like watching them. So there's a lot of things that I think you know, it's when you have someone who takes their own life, you question a million things, right? And you go back and this and that and this and that, but you can't understand it. Definitionally, you can't understand it. And really, in some ways, it doesn't matter how they got the disease. Like we don't ever question how someone got cancer or how someone got, it doesn't really matter because they have it, right? And it's not like we wanted them to have it. It's not like we gave it to them on purpose. And so I think the understanding is the understanding of the ununderstandable. It's just understanding that you will never know and being comfortable with that, right? And I mean, that's why I wrote my book, to try to figure it out. And believe me, if you want to talk to someone who tried to understand everything, you're looking at them. And so it's just some things just happen, right? Good things, bad things happen to good people, and you have to be comfortable with that. It's hard. Took me a long time, right? And but that's my answer.
So there's what I hear you guys saying is that there's not a logical sort of causal way that we can pin down for mental illness, right? Mental illness is not necessarily logical, but there's something about being able to have some compassion for the person who's experiencing mental illness and maybe some acceptance that this is what's going on. It doesn't necessarily make sense. You don't understand where it came from. And there's still that human there that is deserving of compassion, is deserving of love, who also may at the same time be really difficult to be with at times. Both things can be true.
Right.
But maybe that opens the door for some more of that love as you tied those two together, the love and understanding.
Well, and to look at mental illness as an illness,
Yeah, exactly.
and not as a choice, not as a lifestyle choice or the consequence of bad parenting. It's again, I'm a broken record, but people don't want to be mentally ill. They don't want to feel unwell and unlovable and awful.
Yeah.
So it's an illness.
This looks legible.
And we'll be available too afterwards to talk to you.
All right, here's one that's legible. I'm so sorry. And it's, how can you keep your own sanity as a caregiver in these crazy times?
I got a quick answer to that. Okay, so I jump in Lake Michigan every morning. I didn't go this week because ice ledges have formed, but I'm not kidding. I'm a polar bear plunger, and I love it. And you have to find. I also have an e-bike. I'm obsessed with my e-bike. Her name is Mary Frances, after the Pope. But you have to find ways to be joyful in this world. And we have the burden, of having gone through this, and and it can chew you up. You have to find ways to find joy in your life and honor. I feel like I'm honoring my brother and sister by living my life to the fullest, and I'm grateful for the time that I had with them. But I really want to have have as much fun in this world as I can. So you have to go out and chase joy.
Yeah, I am not jumping in Lake Michigan. Even in the summertime, I don't like to go in Lake Michigan. it's, there's a reason they tell you when you're on an airplane to put your oxygen mask on first. You're no good to anybody if you're falling apart. It's hard, though. Look, if you get anything from this talk, if you get anything from me, I want you to, there's two things. It's really, really hard. Really hard. Like, no one would choose this. No one would choose this. But you got it, right? And so there's a great book by a man named Viktor Frankl who wrote In Search of Meaning. And here's a man who, during the concentration camps, Nazi Germany, lost world-renowned psychiatrist who lost everything. I mean, everything, right? And he survived and is an optimist. So, no one likes to be tested, but we all like to believe that when tested, we can overcome, right? So what I would turn it around a little bit, and I would say that the person in your life who you're giving care to is really giving you an opportunity to be the best you can be. And I think if you view it that way, which is hard, right? Really hard. But if you view it that way, it's really a blessing, right? It's a blessing we don't want, but it's a blessing. And being able, I firmly believe that we should all be judged by how we deal with adversity. And some of us get tested more than others. But it's a privilege to overcome. And if you can, and still have a smile on your face and plunge into Lake Michigan, God bless you.
It's so fun.
Yeah, then that's a great thing. And I would flip it on its head, because it's a gift.
But I think you and I both wrote our books. You loved Henry very much. I loved Danny and Nancy very much. We wanted their lives to be remembered, and for them to be remembered in the fullness of their lives, right, and not just the way that they died. And for us to all realize that, just that they were beautiful people. We love them. We lost them, but we're going to go on, and we're here. We're gonna tell our story. We're gonna bear witness and tell our story, so that you'll feel less alone, and you can do the same for others. We can pass that along.
Right. Yeah. I'll second that.